In a case that will undoubtedly affect the 2020 election, the Texas Supreme Court has recently ruled against mail-in ballots, specific mail-in ballots. So now the nine-member court agreed with the arguments of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton that basically they agreed that the risk of contracting coronavirus as a result of doing, of course, in-person voting does not meet the state's qualifications for voting by mail. The court wrote, "We agree with the state that a voter's lack of immunity to COVID-19 without more is not a disability as defined by the election code. In Texas, voters can qualify for mail-in ballots only if they're 65 years or older, have a disability or an illness, will be out of the country during an election period, or are in jail. The Texas election code defines disability as a sickness or physical condition that prevents a voter from appearing in person without the risk of injuring a voter's health." Now, coronavirus is, of course, is very contagious, and it can be deadly to people with who are immunocompromised and have underlying conditions. And so you would think that this does fit their definition of disability because it can injure the voter's health, as it can spread very rapidly when it comes to, of course, unshielded, unclean surfaces. It can hang around in the air in enclosed spaces, all that stuff, right? So now I understand why they tended to go in that direction. This is an all GOP Texas Supreme Court, so they're always going to be against mail-in voting anyway at this point. But they did offer a little bit of a workaround, which is interesting. They said it was up to the voters themselves to assess their own health and determine if they meet the state's definition. So that's interesting. Quote, "We agree, of course, that a voter can take into consideration aspects of his health and his health history that are physical conditions in deciding whether, under the circumstances, to apply to vote by mail because of disability." So, look, before I kind of get into this and really kind of explain how you can really work around that, right, and how easy it is, understand that I'm very pro mail-in ballot. I think we should do this all over the country. But the way the Texas law is set up, I guess their interpretation kind of makes a little bit of sense in a way. Now, the way around it, of course, is when voters cite disability to request an absentee ballot, they're not required to disclose what that disability is. Voters simply check a box in the application form, and if their application is properly filled out, local officials are supposed to send them a ballot. But I'm guessing that a lot of voters don't understand that and don't know that that's a workaround. And so that is a way, of course, of limiting how many people can get access to an absentee ballot. And so that's probably why the Supreme Court limited it in this way. So, I mean, but you can, like I said, and that's why it's important to get this information out, is that you can say, hey, man, look, I could get coronavirus. I'm really worried about it, and I don't want to spread it to my family. I want to do a mail-in ballot, so I'm just going to check this disability box, and I'm going to get my ballot. That's it. That's it. Now, Paxton wanted to stop that because he knew that that was a workaround that people could use to be able to do mail-in ballots. And, of course, since Paxton is against that because it has the unfortunate effect of increasing voting, right? He tried to do that. Now, the high court, interestingly enough, rejected that request. Local election officials will still be able to send in mail-in ballots to voters who are citing a lack of immunity to coronavirus as a disability. So that's the workaround. So it really is kind of an interesting, funny situation, right? They said, well, lack of immunity for coronavirus, we don't consider that a disability, so you can't get an absentee ballot. But then all you have to do is just check a box that says you have a disability, and we can't ask you. So you still end up getting an absentee ballot. It's so strange. Now, there was a lower court ruling about this as well. So the lower court said that voters who lack immunity to the virus could qualify for absentee ballots by citing disability. But again, the Supreme Court in Texas didn't actually try to rule on the merits of that case. And so they ended up doing the interpretation when it comes as I guess they're trying to interpret the state's eligibility for absentee voting, which again only cites disability. In its order, the court indicated that two justices, Jeffrey Boyd and Jane Bland, agreed that a lack of immunity fit the first half of the state's definition for disability as a physical condition. So it gets more complicated, right? But found that it didn't meet the second half because it was, quote, highly improbable for the voters overall to contract the virus. Highly improbable, they say. Are you kidding me? Oh no, highly improbable, even though this is a very, very contagious virus. And that doesn't make any sense, though. So they actually agree that it's a disability, not having an immunity to COVID. Therefore, you could get an absentee ballot. But it's highly improbable for being able to actually get that virus. So it doesn't meet that definition. Doesn't make any sense. Okay. In a concurring opinion, Bland also suggested that higher rates of infection in some communities could present a health risk for some voters, specifically those who lack immunity, which is everybody at this point, and have health histories or physical attributes that make them susceptible to the worst effects of the disease. So that's very clearly spelled out that, like, hey, if you got an immune system, if you got a compromised immune system or any sort of pre-existing condition that could have an impact here, well, then you would qualify for this. So there's a lot of nuance here, right? And it's really strange. But here's the thing, and this is the funny part. This is the ironic part of all of this. This ruling was made when all the justices are separated and doing this over a video call, essentially. They're not meeting in person. Apparently to them, it's safe enough to vote in person because, hey, man, it's highly improbable for people to get sick. But wait, you're not going to meet in person because it's highly probable that people in the court will get sick. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. No, I don't think this case is about what really constitutes a disability, right? Under this, right? Or even about the contagiousness of the virus. No, because again, according to their own standards, it does fit the definition. Not being immune, not having any sort of immunity to this virus, does fit their definition of a disability. It's absurd to say that it's highly improbable to not get it. Just ask poll workers in Wisconsin and voters in Wisconsin who, when they held that primary, because of the response, the Wisconsin GOP, they ended up getting sick with coronavirus. It doesn't make any sense. So what we need here, though, is, look, we need universal mail-in ballots. That's what we need, right? Everybody across the country should be able to not just get, one if they request it. No, you should automatically get one in the mail. You just should, right? That's it. Universal mail-in ballots. Now, of course, there's a reason that people don't want that. Republican officials especially. They don't want that because Trump doesn't want that. Trump doesn't want that because he's scared that if more people vote, he might lose. No, there's no, I don't think there's any reason for you to be afraid of that, right? Unless you know that deep down, your positions are not popular and that you're an unpopular president. Well, if you know that, then of course you would be against expanding access to voting, which is what Republicans have been doing for quite some time. They've been doing it for decades, trying to restrict the votes, doing all sorts of gerrymandering tricks, closing down polling places, and restricting access to the vote. Because, as the godfather of the modern conservative movement had admitted, if more people turn out to vote, we tend to lose. Look up Goo syndrome. Good government. They don't want good government because then that destroys their own goals. It destroys their own aims of course, trying to privatize the system to benefit themselves and their donors. That's what this is about. And so that's why Texas and a lot of other states don't have no excuse absentee ballots. That's why they have fought tooth and nail to try to restrict voting. And so that's, I mean, that's what's going on. They don't want people to vote. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.